Hello and welcome to the first episode of the season for the Tigers Down Under, a brand new season ready to begin in only 2 weeks. It's really kind of crept up to, just getting a bit of feedback there. There you go. Sorry about that. It's just crept up on us already that we've got the season starting in the next 2 weeks, and I've got Logan with me to preview and to cover all of the off-season news so far. How are you, Logan?
Evening, Alex. Yeah, I'm doing pretty well. It's as you said, it's rolled around very quickly, and obviously, after the joys of last season and winning a title, all of a sudden we find ourselves in a totally different contest. So yeah, looking forward to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, may as well jump straight into it. We've had a couple of preseason friendlies over the weekend, so we've actually had a bit of football to talk about first of all, and then we'll get into all of the, I guess, off-season news, the signings, the departures, that takeover that sort of loomed large at the start of the summer and then sort of vanished off into the Twitter sphere, I guess, as we just sort of heard less and less about it. And then also as the EFL embargo as well, sort of the big news of the last week or so as well. So we'll cover all of that. But look, we thought we'd start with some football news or football discussion first of all, with the two preseason friendlies over the weekend. It was a pretty neat split. I thought they might have played some of the first 11 in one game and some in the other to get a bit of a split, but it looks like they've pretty clearly gone. You know, the Mansfield game was essentially the team that will line up first day of the championship season. Scunthorpe's probably the guys pressing for a place in that team over the opening weeks of the championship season. But that Mansfield game, 2-1 loss. It's a preseason game. Result doesn't really matter. What did you take away from that one?
Yeah, obviously we're not being televised and difficult to make a comment on not seeing the full 90 minutes, but we've watched the extended highlights now, and from what all the reports said from people who are at the game and watching that 10 minutes, there looked to be some really positive passages of play. I know the scoreline, as you said, didn't really tell us too much, and in a preseason game, that's not exactly what you're looking for. But I thought King Lewis Potter looked excellent in the highlights. He kind of didn't miss a trick, and every single time there was anything positive or passage of play that to really get excited about, he seemed to be involved. So that's kind of business as usual for him. And I guess the two goals were a handball that was pretty clumsy, and even the second goal we conceded just looked like it was a little bit calamitous. But I guess you kind of expect that stuff in preseason. And when we were on the ball and did look an attacking threat, there was some really promising play. So a lot to get excited about.
Yeah, definitely. And as you said, I mean, we only had the benefit of the extended highlights. We haven't been able to watch the full game. Unfortunately, it's a shame. It would have been nice to have those over the streams, but it is what it is. So we're just sort of talking about what we've seen on those highlights. And look, I guess of the new signings, Moncur looked really sharp to me. There was that passage where there's a lot of intricate passing between Lewis Potter and Moncur and a few others. And I think Moncur ended up cutting it back for Lewis Potter, where I think if he'd cut it across goal to Magennis, that he was right there for an easy tap in. But that's what preseason's for. It's about kind of getting those cobwebs out, getting to know your teammates, get a bit more understanding about each other's movements and that sort of thing. But look, as you said as well, I think Lewis Potter looked fantastic, and he's going to hit the championship like a ton of bricks, I reckon.
Yeah, I think we've kind of expected that for quite some time. It wasn't really a question of whether he will. It was just when he will. And after all of the, contentious, was he going to stay with City, was he not, last season, being left out of games, it's so nice to be in this situation. Like you said, being excited about what lies ahead for him, and the fact that he's doing it at the championship level. I'm really excited to see the heights that this guy can reach. And the fact that he's doing it in a City jersey as well makes it even more special.
Definitely. I guess the two players conspicuous by their absence were, three really, with Callum Elder at left back missing with injury, George Honeyman in midfield, and then also Malik Wilkes up forward. Honeyman, I think, been confirmed as missing the first month or so of football. I don't know if I've heard much about how long Wilkes is out for, and I guess Elder's probably going to miss the first couple as well with that injury he suffered on basically the final game of the season. How concerned are you with those injuries heading into the first game of the season?
Look, they were very critical for us last season, weren't they? And I guess if we're going to, look at just the I guess the influence that they had on the games. Obviously, Malik Wilkes with his goal scoring. I mean, George Honeyman was arguably the player of the season, and not just in the City jersey, but also in League One. And we also talked about the role that Callum Elder played, in particularly the amount of assists that he brought for the side. I mean, make no mistake, that's a lot to be going without to start a championship campaign. As you go up a level or a tier in football and expect to, particularly for this City side, it hasn't been one of huge signings over the off season. It's not like we've been going out and spending the likes of what, say, a Fulham or someone has. And so that does worry us. It's going to be a different type of season in the sense that we do need our best players to fire, and to initially be without three of them it's a concern. However, you can see from the weekend with the two games that did get played, we're going to be able to field a very competitive side between those two squads, and that's exciting in context of knowing that the opposition is obviously going to be more difficult.
Yeah, certainly. I think there's probably some Premier League sides who aren't splashing the sort of cash that Fulham are at the moment. £12 million for former Hull City superstar Harry Wilson is pretty crazy money for a championship club, especially in the current climate. So yeah, that's certainly a high bar that they're setting in terms of spending power, I guess, in the championship. The goal itself, it was a pretty typical Magennis goal, headed in, just showing us that he hasn't really lost much touch over the summer. It's good to see. He'll probably get, I'd guess he'll probably get the nod to start in the first game of the season. I'll hope that McCann basically says to the squad, these are the guys that got us promoted. You'll get first crack at the championship, and it's your spot to lose. So I'll hope that he'll get to start the season up forward and can show that he hasn't lost anything over the summer.
Look, the case is there. I would struggle to see who you could make an argument for as replacing him. He was one of the surprise packets, and I know that when we did our wrap up podcast last season, the story of Magennis is still one that shocks me, and in such a positive way. He really far surpassed our expectations for himself last season, and the fact that he scored in preseason and had another good chance as well. He could have quite easily found himself with two. He's proven that he is the man, and I think that we can absolutely expect to see him, leading the line when we do play round one.
Yeah, no, certainly. Look, I guess probably the only player who could potentially contest for his place in the same team maybe is Longman, who's come in from Brighton, who played in that second game against Scunthorpe. Well, he didn't really lead the line, I guess. We had Eve, Scott, and Longman up forward, sort of rotating through that striker position. 1-0 win against Scunthorpe. Again, not a whole lot to report out of that game. I guess the biggest talking points really are on the team sheet. Seeing Emmanuel get the captaincy, I sort of tweeted out before the game that was great to see. Shows a lot of faith in him. Essentially, well, I mean, we've talked to death about the fact that he was brought in essentially as a depth player, free transfer from Bolton, and then his standing in the club's just gone up and up and up with his performances. And getting the captaincy, even just in a preseason game, is great to see for him. Yeah,
it's exactly what I noticed when I saw the team sheet. It was absolutely Emmanuel getting the captaincy role. Maybe with Callum Elder being out as well, it may lead McCann with an opportunity to kind of tinker with the lineup and whether he decides to switch him to that flank. But Emmanuel was by far and away the most unlucky League One player last season. He never really did anything to warrant losing his spot, but due to Louis Coyle just playing outstanding, he found himself in that predicament. And it was great to see him captain the side, and I would be very surprised if we didn't see a lot more of Emmanuel this season.
Definitely, and I guess the biggest name on the score sheet, on the team sheet, I should say, and the player that sort of lent himself to the title for this episode is, of course, Tommy Huddleston. You have to pinch yourself a little bit to see him back on the City team sheet these days, and I think it was sort of put perfectly on Twitter that even if that was his final appearance in the City shirt, just the chance for City supporters to show him how much he meant to them, to give us that sort of link back to that, terrific FA Cup final / European run of football that we had under Steve Bruce. He's that link to that era, and to have him run out again for City, even if it is just for one last time, was pretty awesome.
Yeah, exactly right. My feelings, you've described them perfectly. It was surreal to see him in a jersey, and to be talking so fondly of the club. And it's just kind of nice to see that how well revered he is, not only by the fans but also the coaching staff. There's obviously people still around the club that recognise the legacy that Tom Huddleston left, and that direct link to somewhat of a golden era. It was great to see us extend a hand and help him out. And, I guess the speculation of whether he'll sign now permanently is the first thing that comes to fans' minds. But whether he does or he doesn't, it was great to see him play. And, I mean, I guess the transfer embargo or restrictions that are placed on us does make that a potentially more difficult predicament to speculate on. But just knowing the quality of player that he is and the passing ability that he possesses, we definitely have some guys in our midfield who are incredibly active and very diligent workhorses. So there's a case to be made that you could certainly play Tom Huddleston there, knowing he is a very strong passer of the ball, and he'd be protected by the people around him. So look, I'm sure there'll be a lot more written about it between now and round one, and whether that happens or whether it doesn't, it was very nice to see Tom Huddleston back in a Tiger shirt.
Yeah, I think if it was a midfield three of Honeyman, Doherty and Huddleston, I think Honeyman and Doherty's legs between them make up for any lack of legs from Big Tom. But, former City players, Andy Robertson, Curtis Davies, who was the other one? Well, David Myler as well, have all sort of lent their voices to a chorus saying, announce him as a new signing, sign him up. Where do you sit on that? Do you see a position for him as sort of maybe it's a 1-year contract and then a move into the coaching ranks, or how would you say it?
Well, the first thing that needs to be said on this, and I guess I'm going from the cries of the fans, is if there's ever a club who is extremely nostalgic when it comes to fans' opinions and romanticizing the previous signings and people who wore the jersey. You see it all the time now with the success of Harry Maguire and Andy Robertson, when people write things on all the socials about them scoring or them doing well, and they're crucified almost instantly. They don't play for City anymore. Let's get over it. So, I mean, we need to try and separate the emotion from the quality that Tom Huddleston possesses before any rational argument can be made as to whether he should be signed or not. Now, as I just alluded to, Tom Huddleston is one of the most incredible passers of the football that we've seen. And certainly at City in the last decade, you would struggle to find a better passer of the ball than Tom Huddleston. Now, if Grant McCann sees that as something that would be a incredible attribute to fit his system, and he's got a style where at some point along the road this season, Tom Huddleston's going to be an asset, well, he's probably not going to cost too much. And as you said, you could certainly sign him for a 1-year contract and make it, performance based as far as whether there's any future beyond it. And if with the transfer embargo conditions, restrictions, whatever it is that, once we've gone through this appeal process, whatever still remains, if he's a signing that suits McCann's coaching philosophy and he can see a reason for him, well, at 34 years of age, I think there's a lot more football that, and contributions that Tom Huddleston can offer the club. And maybe not just in his on-field ability, but also what he can offer the dressing room and the experience that he does have of being, one of England's elite footballers over the last decade. And I think there's a very strong case to be made. I would certainly like to see it happen, but, what happens behind closed doors and what the coaching staff think about is their best method for success in the championship. Well, that's entirely up to them.
Yeah, and look, I mean, we sort of talked end of last season about the potential to bring in Curtis Davies, and it's funny that we've sort of gone for the other former City player at Derby. But look, the point was made at the time. I think having that sort of experienced voice around the dressing room, even if he's not coming out on the pitch in the first 11, that experience, that knowledge around the training course, everything like that, is so invaluable for those young players. We've got so many young players in the squad now that having an older head in the team is a real asset to the club as well. So there's a whole lot of intangible elements to that potential signing beyond just, will he run out on Saturday and play for the 90 minutes or something like that. So look, it's going to be very interesting to see what happens. I guess I did just want to touch on, before we move on from the games themselves, a lot of young players who sort of put their hands up or got the fans to take notice of them during the games as well. We had Smith, Green, Leake as well. Leake, apparently really highly rated left back, who's sort of third in line, I guess, at the club at the moment. All put in really great games across the 2 games as well. So a lot, it's always exciting to see these young players come through. And it's only 2 years ago that was Lewis Potter, and he broke into the first team as well. So there's always those opportunities for those players to put their hand up, to get a run out the first month of the season and try and either cement a spot in the first 11 or at least just be in and around the squad.
Certainly, and it's got the kind of, the shades of players like Jared Bowen as well, who have come through the academy in recent times and, emerged into the, I guess, I want to say the world stage, but perhaps the English domestic football stage, where they've shown themselves to be incredible footballers. And like you said, these preseason games offer a huge chance for them to reveal themselves. I mean, reflecting on the highlights alone, the hugest or the largest disappointment for me is still watching Scott. I thought that, his role at Scunthorpe, that would be the perfect game for him to kind of, step up and kind of put his hand up and emerge as someone who is, chomping on the heels of the front three and making a strong case to kind of play some championship football. And it was really difficult to not see any of that, particularly when you consider that, Wilkes may not be starting, or certainly won't be starting the season. And so there's still a lot of, speculation whether those guys or those type players are going to emerge. And I mean, if not, well, of course, these young guys that are starting to, prove themselves and have had some really positive preseason showings, and we'll see hopefully a bit more of that with the 2 preseason games to come. Well, that's their chance of putting their hand up and coming in and really making a shout for at least a bench spot in those early rounds.
Yeah, I think definitely Scott and also Eves were probably the biggest disappointments for me in that Scunthorpe game in particular. Just didn't see anything. And look, and granted, as we're saying, we're just seeing the highlights, but just didn't see anything from either of them that really kind of screamed that they had sort of improved or found form or confidence over the summer to start the season in any meaningful way. And it's a real shame with Scott, because it was a pretty big fee outlaid for him as part of the Bowen sale. I think we paid about $1.5 million for him in the end, which, I mean, to be honest, that's probably almost the highest fee we've paid for a player in the current squad. So it's a big investment, and it'll be a big shame if it doesn't really pay off for him. And look, he's had a lot of bad luck as well. I mean, he got that injury the minute he stepped on the training pitch when he first signed for us. He hasn't really been able to get going, but I really hoped last season in particular in League One, he was going to at least emerge and be sort of a semi-consistent option for us, but he really just didn't do much at all. So I think this season is a bit of a make or break for him.
And especially when you consider the format of the way that the 2, preseason games were played, it was, as you mentioned at the start, it was very obvious that Grant McCann has a pretty solidified first 11, and that was the game that we saw take place against Mansfield. So, I mean, with the exception of probably Emmanuel, who captained the side, he probably has a very large reason to remain optimistic. But for players like your James Scotts and your Tom Eves, they should be taking that performance personally and knowing that was a real chance for them to shine in that game and be thrown straight back into the equation. But the fact that they didn't, it's certainly concerning when, you're looking at a squad for a championship season where we know the games come thick and fast. It's hard to really trust that those guys are going to be dependable if we do see some injuries to our key players.
No, absolutely. And probably 2 of the biggest standouts in that game are players that we'll talk about now. We'll move on and talk about transfers into the club, first of all, before we look at outgoings. And 2 players that stood out in that game, Baxter on loan from Chelsea and Longman on loan from Brighton, I thought looked really impressive. I think Baxter looks really assured in goal. He'll be a great... I mean, look, it's hard to read that situation. I assume he'll be back up to Ingram, at least initially. But it's good, at least, that we are bringing in a second keeper who is there genuinely to challenge Ingram for that number 1 shirt. And we saw last season the value of having that pressure and competition between him and Long. And Baxter obviously had a great season last year with Accrington Stanley. So he'll be a good competition for Long in goal. And Longman looks like a really good forward option, really quick, pacey. We seem to be finding a lot of these sorts of specialist or not specialist winger/striker players who can sort of drift anywhere across that front three. And I can just imagine that, when we've got Wilkes, KLP, Longman, and all these other guys fit, Scott even really as well is the same sort of player. They can all play anywhere across that front three, and it can really cause a lot of confusion for the opposition. So, yeah, really, really good first up showings for them both.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that exactly like you're saying, it sends a really clear intent for the type of system and the way that McCann approaches his football. It's so much more about outscoring the opposition and getting bodies forward. So, a lot of questions will be asked, but I guess, when you consider that, you also have to think about, what's happening on the other end of the football. And so it obviously, speaks into the trust that he does have now in the defence. And I guess the work ethic of, your George Honeymans and your Dohertys of the world.
Yeah, certainly. And then as permanent signings, it's only the three so far. And look, granted, it was really good to start to see some signings coming in quite early in the window, similar to last year. We were getting our business done early, and we'll talk a little bit later about the transfer embargo. And in some ways, I feel like we're sort of being not punished for doing our business early, but I suspect we've sort of made assumptions around the conditions on that embargo, which have sort of bitten us a little bit in the way we've gone about our business. But look, nevertheless, we've brought in Moncur from Luton, Cannon from Portsmouth, and Williams from Exeter. And I guess, again, Moncur's another one who can sort of drift anywhere across that front three, and already sort of touched on how impressive he looked in the game against Mansfield. But all three of them pretty strong signings. Cannon, of course, getting the winner against Scunthorpe as well. So, off to a good start for the club.
Yeah, that's right. I didn't think that any of them did themselves any harm in those two preseason games. Although, I mean, if you're a club where people are doing harm in preseason games, then you need to reevaluate yourselves, I think. But yeah, you're right. It was really promising first up performance from all of them, particularly Cannon, like getting the goal and a wonder strike of that. I think that there's no quicker way to endear yourself to a fan base than to come up with something like that on your first outing in the City shirt. So yeah, looking forward to seeing a lot more from those three.
Definitely. And look, there's been a lot of outgoings, but when you take a step back and actually look at their contributions last season, I feel like Burke is probably the only outgoing that I really feel like we'll miss to any great extent. I guess in saying that, Device going to QPR, Burke to Luton, was essentially our first choice centre-back pairing in the championship last time out. So it's a loss of experience in that sense. But of course, we know Alfie Jones and Jacob Greaves both coming into to centre-back last year really put no foot wrong. So really strong pairing for us going into the championship. I'd probably say that's the area that we need to focus on the most in terms of improving or strengthening before the window closes. But then really just, Clark, who didn't make an appearance, heading off to Fleetwood, and then George Long going to Millwall as well. We're really the players, and Samuelson going to FK Haugesund as well, as basically the only first-team players who've been gone, who've left.
Yeah, exactly. And like you said, I guess when you're reflecting on your outs, the first question you ask yourself is, well, of the crucial players in the squad last season and the role that they played, who are we waving goodbye to that's incredibly influential? And I guess when you're a Premier League team and you go back to the championship, this is always the most frightening part of relegation is losing, arguably your far and away your best players and not recouping the right price for them. And looking at who we've lost, I think it was expected. Geordie Device left pretty early in the piece. We're always expecting that. Apart from that, Clark didn't end up playing any real football. George Long we expected to leave. Samuelson was a role player at best. And so when you consider that and break it down kind of individually, there's nobody there that you think that we're going to be far worse off without. Although, as you said, the case can be made. Like Burke and Device in their time were incredibly good stewards for the club, and there was times where that centre-back partnership was humming and you felt incredibly safe with them back there. But, certainly on last season's merit, that wasn't the case. Burke was helpful at times, but, it became very clear that Alfie Jones and Jacob Greaves were our most influential defenders. So, fair play to them.
Yeah, and then I guess the interesting element is the outgoing loans, which is Jordan Flores going to Northampton. I think that one's fair enough. I think he was sort of brought in as depth in League One and just didn't really show that he had a future in the Championship for us. But then Callum Jones going to Morecambe, and then Billy Chadwick and Ahmed Salam going to Linfield in Northern Ireland. Now, the cool thing about that is that I think I haven't actually seen the result of their Champions League qualifier, but they presumably went into the squad for a Champions League qualifier for Linfield, which was quite cool, considering they're coming from essentially a League One squad. The interesting thing about those outgoings is, of course, with the EFL embargo, my understanding is that the club was under the belief that basically that any players loaned out would not be counted in our 25 players. And not only that, but that the 25 players were players of professional standing. And it seems as if there's a bit of a grey area in terms of what constitutes professional standing. And I think because Callum Jones has played 1 or 2 games for us in League One last season, as well as a few other players. The guy whose name I've now forgotten, who played for us in the last game of the season, who played 20 minutes off the bench or whatever it was, is now considered one of our 25 players as well. So there's a bit of work to be done, I think, in clarifying what the conditions of this embargo are, as well as just the consideration of whether we just because essentially it was a grant that the EFL paid us to sort of maintain cash flow over COVID last season. Consideration of whether we just pay the grant back and just say thanks but no thanks, and it just seems like it's hamstringing the squad a bit too much.
Yeah, it's an incredibly sad way to start the season, and like you said, we're talking about a League One club on its way up to the Championship as well. So, I mean, it's not like we're a top flight club coming down, or have debatably push the rules beyond extent with, like, we'll say, a situation with your Derby counties of the world. But it's just it's such an interesting predicament for as you said, what constitutes a player of professional caliber. How are they included in your 25-man squad? I mean, part of this is a hypothetical, but we've talked about the ownership rumors. Like, what if new owners were to buy the club and in a surprise turn of events, and exactly like you said, just pay the loan straight up? Like, what does that then mean? Like, there's so many unknowns about this, and it was certainly the way that it was reported in the media. It happened so quickly, and it was done in such a kind of subtle, surprising way.
Well, yeah, because I think my sense of it is that essentially, well, at least this is my understanding, was that we got the money last year from the EFL to sort of maintain the cash flow during League One. And I think a lot of clubs took the loan, so they're all under the same conditions. But it was just strange that they only published the embargo notification halfway through the window. So it was almost as if the club had an understanding of what the embargo meant and what they could and couldn't do, and we were presumably following it. But then, of course, you have to think about the fact that we were lining up a bid for Regan Slater. So either that means that we were unaware that we couldn't sign permanent players from clubs, or we were just planning to reimburse the grant, and which would basically absolve us of all of the restrictions. But it's just such a weird one.
And if you read some of the rumblings, there's still a very big case, and I know that there's still a lot of talk about a bid still being tabled for Regan Slater, and again, whether Tom Huddleston will be signed. So it's just it would be so fascinating to see what they do over the next fortnight, as far as preparing for that season, and getting a little bit more clarification around what are the options still available to City, because it would be an incredible shame to start the Championship season with restrictions like this and miss out on some crucial business that could ultimately be the difference between us making a good playoff run or staying up potentially, and not. So I think that we'll certainly be talking about this a lot over the next fortnight.
Yeah, and it's certainly a bit ironic that this grant is meant to have assisted clubs in being sustainable and sort of staying afloat, and then they're essentially punishing clubs for sending players out on loan, or punishing clubs for blooding 17, 18-year-old kids and giving them minutes in the league, and saying, well, no, now these count as players and you can't go out and try and improve your squad. It all just seems a bit backwards. But then again, it is the EFL, and you look at what's happened with Derby and Wickham getting relegated, and Derby then being penalised, and it was such a mess in that situation as well. So a bit unsurprising when it comes to the EFL, but it is what it is. I guess the last topic that we're going to touch on is the ownership rumors. And to be honest, since our last episode, I think where we were sort of touching on the rumors at that point in time, I don't think there's actually been anything heard since then. So do you, I guess there's two ways of viewing that. Is, do you see that as just meaning that it was all just smoke and mirrors and it's just completely gone away? Or do you see it as maybe there's just, it's just gone all quiet because maybe it's all being done behind closed doors and then all of a sudden it'll be announced, a month from now that, yep, there's going to be a takeover completed?
I don't think I'm the best person to ask for this, and simply because I've just lost that sense of optimism when it comes to the club being sold. I think that we've been through this so many times of the if it's
fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me sort of thing.
Absolutely. And so, I mean, there's such an unpredictability about how the Allams do their business, and because there is always that when we talk about the communication to what actually goes on behind closed doors and what actually gets communicated to the fans is often two different things. And so when you hear rumblings about potential Turkish owners, I don't doubt that there is interested buyers for the club, and if they were from some Turkish descent or business that had some kind of investment and wanted to be involved in a club takeover, I suspect that was there. How close it got and or how close it still may or may not be is still interesting, but it's just anyone's guess. And so
I think there's a lot of people who share that opinion, and they just say until there's that the typical corner flag picture on a post on Twitter to say club statement with the confirmation, then it's not worth spending too much energy on it.
Yeah, and I guess also, Alex, at this point in time, it's also worth mentioning that the Allams did a very good job last season, and they've done what a lot of the fans, apart from the fact that there's still a long-lasting hatred that I don't think will ever fully be repaired. And, that will certainly be talked about again in the next coming weeks when we have a debate when fans are allowed back into grounds and how many start to go and how much that affects the crowd and all those types of things. It's the fact that how much of this limbo land period are we going to continue to operate under? Because they went out and they did business early. They brought in some signings under a shoestring budget that the fans wanted. We've always been hypercritical about signings being done too late, and they went out and they answered those questions. The recruitment last year was fantastic. We've got a very hungry and young squad now that is certainly capable and ready for the championship, and that's far more than what we had at the beginning of last season when we got rid of a lot of players and under very tumultuous circumstances, the amount of players that left the club seemingly without explanation. And so even though for a group of owners who are despised by the fans, they are still doing a very good job of keeping us relevant. And regardless what their motives are for that, whilst it's a fractured relationship, it's still strangely functional, which plays into this question, I guess, with how much we want and need the club to be sold.
Yeah, we've seen as well the club website, which was previously hullcitytigers.co.uk or something like that. It's now changed to We Are Hull City. There's a huge marketing campaign pushing the phrase We Are Hull City, which is great because obviously one of the biggest points of contention was the name change or the attempted name change away from Hull City. Real push to get members to re-sign. One of the big issues there was the lack of concessions. There's a range of different prices for different age groups available on the memberships as well. Look, it is a shame. And I had a Twitter exchange with someone a few weeks ago where I sort of tried to ask what are the current anti-fan policies of the Allams, because that's always the point where Allams are anti-fans and they're acting they're not acting in the best interest of the fans. And it didn't seem like there was really an answer. And I do get that there is that resentment from previous actions, and there'll always be that resentment for the previous actions. But I guess the point I was trying to get to was, what is there currently that is upsetting fans or currently working against the fans? And the answer really is that there isn't really anything. And you then have to say to yourselves, especially after these 18 months of COVID restrictions, is it worth holding on to those previous resentments and holding on to that stubborn dislike of the Allams. And if you want to, that's absolutely fine. That's your call. But then you also have to think, this group of players who've just got us a league title in League One, they've got promoted back to the Championship, they deserve to be playing in front of 18 to 20,000 supporters every week. And we have the supporter base to do that. We have the supporters and the interest and the passion in the city for that to happen. And ultimately, it's the fans deciding between supporting the players and enjoying themselves at the football as well, or staying away to spite the owners. And like I said, if you want to stay away to spite the owners, that's absolutely your call, and that's absolutely your right to have that opinion. But that's ultimately what it seems to boil down to.
Yeah, and I think that one of the other areas that we have to consider here is long term what this actually looks like. So, for example, let's hypothetically say that we have a fantastic season, find ourselves in the playoffs, and lo and behold, even the miraculous happens, and we find ourselves with another promotion. If we're a club that is still, feuding with our owners, how hard is it going to be for us to then go and draw, any kind of top tier player to want to come and play at a club when, if there's another 3 or 4 clubs with their hat in the ring, we become a very difficult club to kind of, to be sold on. And I think that's, we become with this vicious, attitude towards our owners does become the undoing of ourselves. And, we've mentioned this before as City's fans who live on the other side of the globe. We are disconnected, and we don't have the opportunity to go to games, and it's hard for us to always speak into this because we understand the area that we sit on is very different to the working class fan that does pump their money into tickets week in, week out. But just for the health of the club, it's gone on for so long now, and we are functioning, but it would just be so nice to find a resolution, whether that means that the Allams finally go, or if there is a part of the fan base that do start to swing and realize that, albeit the fact that they've had some pretty horrible run-ins, that there is, some positive or optimistic changes that they have actually worked on to get the club back into a better state. And ultimately that's what we should be caring about the most, the state of the club.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, look, it's been a good first episode back to talk to you about all the goings on off field and on. Just to let everyone know who's listening in or watching along, we do have a few new features in store this year. We did do player reviews last year. We've kind of worked our way through the squad. So instead of doing that again this year, what we're going to do is we're going to have a flashback feature where essentially I'll have a topic of the week and try and get my co-host to guess the 3 instances where that's occurred. As an example, we might talk about when's the last 3 times a City player has scored a hat-trick. And we'll see if you can kind of figure out or guess when those last 3 times were, and I'll sort of help us through it if we're struggling with the players' names or the events in question, and then we'll sort of talk about those as well. So that's sort of a new feature that we're going to try out this year. We'll continue with our Player of the Year voting as always as well. And also because we've been doing our decade in review episodes as well, we're sort of figuring that we're getting to a point now where 10 years ago, we've got pretty clear memories of goings on at the club as well. So if there's any sort of notable events from 10 years ago, we'll try and bring those up as sort of an on this day feature and talk about those as well. But otherwise, as always, we've got our Patreon that's up and running. So any support that you're able to give through there is very much appreciated. All proceeds go into the running of the podcast. So anything that you're able to provide is of course, very much appreciated as well. But otherwise, a like, comment, share the episodes around. What are you looking forward to this season? What do you think of the signings so far? What players do you think we still need to target or positions we need to fill? Let us know in the comments on YouTube or on Twitter. And just, like, share, comment on the episodes as you see them. That would be very much appreciated. But otherwise, until next time, thanks for joining me, Logan.
No worries, Alex. It's good to be back.
No problem. And thank you, everyone, for listening in. Until next time, come on, City.